For centuries, the galaxy spoke of them in whispers. A race of warriors so fearsome, so impossibly resilient, that their enemies had done the unthinkable, erased them from history. No records, no memorials, nothing but a fading legend. And then, one day, they returned. It started with a distress signal. A deep space mining colony, drifting on the edge of the Orion expanse, sent out a desperate plea for help. The colony had been attacked, its defenses overwhelmed by an unknown force. When the United Galactic Council intercepted the message, they assumed it was another skirmish with the VA Rock Raiders, the ruthless scavengers who preyed on isolated outposts. But when a reconnaissance ship arrived to investigate, what they found defied all logic. The attackers, more than 200 of them, were gone. Not a single body remained. The only clue to what had happened was a single phrase, scratched into the steel hull of the colony's central command tower. "We have returned." The words sent shockwaves through the highest levels of galactic power. They had seen those words before. Admiral Corvin of the Galactic Fleet felt a chill run down his spine as he stared at the transmission. "Impossible," he muttered. "It can't be them. They were wiped out centuries ago." But deep down, he knew the truth. The lost warriors of Earth, humanity itself, had reappeared. And the galaxy was not ready. The message was clear. The human warriors had returned. But why? What had happened during their long absence? The galactic powers were on edge, unsure whether to fear the return of the warriors or welcome it. Some whispered that they were the galaxy's salvation, others feared they were a harbinger of destruction. The question on everyone's mind was, who were these warriors, and why had they come back? Admiral Corvin sat in the command center of the fleet's flagship, the Regal Horizon. His fingers drummed nervously on the console as the reports from the mining colony continued to roll in. The once thriving outpost had been reduced to rubble, yet no signs of the attackers remained. The scanners had detected no ships, no remains, nothing. The invaders had come and gone like shadows. What kind of warriors can do this? Corvin muttered under his breath. "Sir," one of the junior officers spoke up, "we've just received word from the Galactic Council. They've ordered us to head to Earth immediately." Corvin's gaze narrowed. Earth. The home of humanity. After the last of the human colonies had been abandoned during the war centuries ago, Earth had become a myth, a distant memory of a once great civilization. No one had visited for centuries, and no one had dared to disturb it. But now there was something different about it. The fleet's flagship departed at once, heading toward the distant blue planet. As it cruised through space, Corvin couldn't shake the feeling that the human warriors were not simply returning to reclaim what was once theirs, but something far more profound was unfolding, something that could reshape the entire galaxy. Back on Earth, the situation was more complicated than anyone knew. The first signs of humanity's return had been subtle. At first, they were only whispers in the military networks, mysterious transmissions from unknown sources. Then came the first reports, human ships emerging from the fringes of the galaxy, traveling at speeds no one had thought possible. By the time the Regal Horizon arrived in Earth's orbit, it was clear that humanity had not returned in the way anyone had expected. The surface of Earth was scarred. Vast cities lay abandoned, overgrown with greenery. Once great empires had crumbled, leaving behind only traces of a civilization that had once dominated the stars. Yet, in the heart of the planet's largest continent, deep beneath the ruins of the human capital, a vast complex had remained hidden. The human warriors had made their home there. Corvin watched the data flood in from his sensors as his fleet moved into orbit. Below him, Earth's vast cities were crumbled monuments to a forgotten past. But it was the vast, hidden network beneath the surface that intrigued him most. For the first time in centuries, a faint pulse of energy surged from below the planet's crust. It was a signal, humanity was alive. And they had not come back empty-handed. Corvin couldn't help but feel a sense of awe mixed with trepidation. He knew what humanity was capable of. They were the architects of the original Galactic Empire, fierce warriors, brilliant tacticians, and unrivaled strategists. But in their wake, they had left a trail of destruction. Was this their return to reclaim their dominion? Or had something even darker been awakened beneath the surface? Back on Earth, within the massive underground complex, a council of leaders, long hidden from the outside world, prepared for the galaxy's arrival. The ancient humans were not a simple remnant of the past. They were an evolved force, survivors of a brutal war and explorers of deep space. Their return was not just for retribution, it was to ensure the survival of the galaxy as they knew it. The leader of the Human Council, an elderly man whose features were hardened by time and loss, addressed the group in a voice that commanded respect. "They've come," he said simply. "The galaxy has come for us, and it is our time to rise again." As the fleet prepared to land on Earth, tensions reached a boiling point. What was waiting for them below? And how would the galaxy react to humanity's return? The lines between friend and foe began to blur. The delicate balance of power in the galaxy was in danger of unraveling. Corvin's mind raced as he watched the planet grow larger on his view screen. Humanity's warriors, who had once conquered the stars, were now about to emerge from the shadows. Their arrival was inevitable, but the questions remained: would they restore peace? Or would they once again plunge the galaxy into chaos? The time had come. But the galaxy had no idea what was about to unfold. The ground trembled as the fleet descended into Earth's atmosphere, the tension palpable among the officers aboard the Regal Horizon. The view from the command deck was breathtaking: vast stretches of blue oceans, once proud cities reduced to ruins, and the ancient, unspoiled wilderness that had flourished in humanity's absence. It was a world both familiar and foreign. A place that held secrets, mysteries, and a powerful legacy buried deep beneath its surface. As the ship landed, Corvin's mind raced. He had been part of the Galactic Council for years, a leader who had seen the rise and fall of countless civilizations. But there was something about this mission, something about the return of the human warriors, that struck a chord in his heart. It was as if the very fabric of the galaxy was about to change, and no one knew what the consequences would be. The landing was smooth, the ship's engines powering down as the crew prepared for disembarkation. Corvin, standing tall in his uniform, gave a brief nod to his officers. "Let's move," he said, his voice steady but carrying a weight of authority. Outside, the world of Earth seemed suspended in time. The vast, dense forests had overtaken what were once gleaming skyscrapers, their glass windows now long shattered and covered by creeping vines. The ancient roads, cracked and weathered, were now nothing more than faint traces of what had been. The planet's surface seemed almost deserted, devoid of the bustling life that had once populated it. But Corvin knew better. There was life here. Humanity had not simply vanished, they had retreated underground, hiding from the galaxy that had once feared and revered them. As the ground team moved through the desolate landscape, Corvin felt the weight of history pressing down on him. The warriors, the legends of ancient human combat, had been absent for centuries. No one knew exactly what had driven them into seclusion, nor what they had become in the time they had been hidden. But there was one thing Corvin did know: they were no longer the humans of the past. They had evolved, adapted, and become something else entirely. The journey took them deep beneath the surface, to a hidden entrance that had been sealed for centuries. The technology that once powered Earth's cities now lay dormant, forgotten by time. Yet, the ancient warriors had maintained their stronghold, far below where any eyes could see. The air grew colder as they descended into the depths, their flashlights illuminating the darkened path ahead. The walls were made of materials Corvin had never seen before, smooth and seemingly impervious to time. Ancient markings adorned the walls, cryptic symbols that seemed to pulse with a faint energy. It was clear that these warriors were not just survivors, they were keepers of something far greater. At the heart of this underground complex, Corvin and his team found themselves before a massive chamber, its entrance guarded by two towering statues of ancient human warriors, their faces grim and resolute. The doors creaked open, revealing a sprawling hall adorned with remnants of humanity's glorious past, ancient weapons, battle armor, and holographic displays of star maps that showed the galaxy in ways Corvin had never seen before. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the chamber, low and gravelly, like the sound of ancient stone grinding against stone. "You have arrived," the voice intoned. "At long last, the galaxy has returned to us." Corvin froze, his heart pounding in his chest. There, in the center of the chamber, stood the leader of the human warriors, a figure cloaked in a dark, flowing robe, their face obscured by a hood. But the voice, the energy radiating from them, was unmistakable. This was no mere mortal. This was a being who had transcended humanity, someone who had witnessed the galaxy's rise and fall, someone who had seen the truth of the universe. "Who are you?" Corvin asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The figure's head tilted slightly, as if considering the question. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, they lifted their hood, revealing a face that was both ancient and ageless, a face marked by time, yet filled with an unwavering strength. "I am the last of the human warriors," the figure replied, their voice steady. "And I have waited long for this moment." Corvin felt a chill run down his spine. The stories were true. These were not just the last survivors of a forgotten race, they were something far greater. Their return was not merely a chance for humanity to reclaim its place in the galaxy, it was the beginning of something far more profound. Back on the surface, word had already begun to spread. The galaxy was watching. The great powers of the known universe, once content with their dominance, were now on high alert. The return of the human warriors was not a moment to be taken lightly. The ancient humans had been the galaxy's conquerors, feared for their unparalleled strength and wisdom. Now, they were back, and the question on everyone's mind was whether they would restore order to the galaxy or take it for themselves. At the same time, something unexpected was happening. Small groups of humans began to emerge from the underground complexes, traveling to different corners of the Earth. They were not just warriors, they were scholars, healers, and leaders, spreading knowledge and hope to the broken planet. The warriors were not merely concerned with reclaiming the stars, they sought to heal and rebuild, to give humanity a second chance. Corvin, still standing in the heart of the underground complex, looked around him at the ancient warriors. Their presence was both awe-inspiring and unsettling. But as he met their gaze, he knew one thing for certain: the return of the human warriors would change everything. The galaxy had been waiting for this moment, for humanity to rise once more. The chamber was thick with an eerie silence, the kind that presses against your chest and makes every breath feel heavier than the last. Corvin's mind raced, his eyes locked on the figure in front of him, the human warrior who stood before them as if they had never left. He could almost feel the weight of the centuries of isolation, the centuries of preparation, and the countless battles fought and won in the shadows of history. The voice of the leader echoed again, carrying an air of undeniable power, tempered by the years of solitude and reflection. "Your galaxy," they began, "has long since forgotten the true power of humanity. You have seen the rise and fall of many civilizations. You have watched as the stars burned bright with hope, only to fade to darkness. But we are the keepers of something far more ancient. Something that cannot be erased by time." Corvin swallowed hard, trying to process what was unfolding before him. He had heard the stories, the whispers, but now that he stood face to face with one of these legendary beings, everything felt far more real, and far more dangerous. "We left," the human warrior continued, "not because we feared the galaxy, but because we knew that its time was not yet ripe for humanity's return. We fought battles beyond your comprehension, pushing the boundaries of what you know, but we needed time. Time to rebuild, to strengthen. And now, after centuries of waiting, the moment has come." Corvin's thoughts tumbled in 1,000 directions, trying to grasp what these words meant. The galaxy had moved on. The power structures, the politics, the alliances, all of it had shifted during humanity's long absence. But these warriors, these beings who had shaped galactic history, had never truly left. They had been waiting. Why now? Corvin finally asked, his voice steady but full of disbelief. Why return after so long? The warrior's gaze flickered to the sky above, where the remnants of a shattered civilization lingered, fading with time. Because, the warrior said, the galaxy is at a precipice. The old empires are crumbling, and new threats, unseen, unknowable, are rising from the depths of the unknown. The time of peace is ending, and with it, the time for our people to remain hidden has come to a close. There was an undeniable authority in their words. It wasn't just the weight of their age, the power of their experiences, it was the truth. Corvin could feel it deep in his bones. Humanity had been the galaxy's quiet force for so long. Now, they would return not as saviors, but as warriors once more. As the figure stepped forward, the air seemed to shimmer with an energy that Corvin couldn't fully comprehend. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional, almost spiritual. This was no ordinary moment. This was a turning point. For Earth, for humanity, and for the galaxy itself. Corvin glanced at his officers. Some were awestruck, others skeptical, but all were on edge. The weight of history hung heavily in the air. What would they do now? What was the next move? The human leader raised a hand, motioning to the vast chamber that surrounded them. You, Corvin of the Galactic Council, have come to witness our return. But there is something more you must understand. We do not seek your approval, nor do we care for your politics. We seek only to restore balance. To do so, we need those who will stand with us. Corvin felt a flicker of tension rising in his chest. This was no longer about diplomacy or alliances, it was about survival. He had heard stories of how humanity had once dominated the stars, but no one had truly known the depths of their power, their resilience. What had once been a whisper in the galactic halls of power was now a resounding call to action. We will lead, the human leader said, not as conquerors, but as protectors. The galaxy has forgotten its roots, forgotten what it means to be human. We will remind them. The old powers may tremble, but we will build something new, something stronger than ever before. A ripple of energy surged through the room, and Corvin could feel it in his chest, a pulse that seemed to reverberate across the stars. The ancient humans were not just returning to reclaim their place, they were returning to reshape the galaxy, and no one would be able to stop them. Back outside, in the ruins of the old world, humanity's first steps into the future were being taken. The underground stronghold that had hidden them for so long was now a place of purpose, of renewal. The warriors, once hidden away from the eyes of the galaxy, were now beginning to reassert themselves, not with weapons, but with knowledge, wisdom, and strength. Their emergence wasn't violent, it was deliberate. One by one, small groups began to travel, not just across Earth, but to other corners of the galaxy, reconnecting with the species they had once known. The Earth itself, long scarred by the ravages of war, was being healed by their hands. The warriors were no longer just combatants. They were healers, engineers, strategists, and diplomats. Corvin's mind wandered as he observed the growing movement. Humanity had always been resilient. They had thrived even in the darkest of times, even when all seemed lost. But what they had become in these centuries of isolation was something entirely different, something that would shake the foundations of the galaxy. The leader of the human warriors turned to Corvin once more, a calm look on their face as they spoke softly, but with an undeniable certainty. Change is coming, Corvin. And it will start with us. Humanity will no longer be a shadow in the galaxy. We are the flame that will ignite the stars. As Corvin watched the ancient warriors begin their preparations, he understood, this was not just a return. It was the beginning of a new era, one where the very fabric of the galaxy would be rewritten by the hands of those who had once ruled it. And soon, the galaxy would realize that they were not just witnessing the return of humanity. They were witnessing the birth of something far greater. Corvin stood silently, watching the human warriors move with precision and purpose. He was no longer sure what to think. The Grand Chamber, once a place of ancient power, had become a bustling hub of activity. The warriors spoke among themselves in a language that seemed to echo with history, their words carrying weight that Corvin couldn't quite understand. They weren't just preparing for war, they were preparing for something far grander. His mind buzzed with questions, yet the answers seemed elusive. What did humanity truly want? What was their place in this galaxy now that they had returned? Corvin's instincts told him to be cautious. He had seen the rise and fall of too many empires, too many leaders promising change only to turn destructive. But these humans were different. They were calm, deliberate, and their eyes carried a knowledge far beyond anything he'd ever encountered. A sudden voice broke through his thoughts. Corvin. He turned to find one of his senior officers standing behind him, her face tense with uncertainty. The message is clear, she said, her tone a mix of admiration and wariness. They want us to choose a side. Corvin stared at her for a long moment. The warriors hadn't spoken of alliances, not explicitly. But they had made their intentions known. Humanity was ready to re-enter the galaxy with or without the help of the Council. And if the Council didn't fall in line, it would risk becoming irrelevant in the face of what was coming. I need to think, Corvin said, his voice barely above a whisper. The weight of the decision was pressing on him. This wasn't just about diplomacy anymore, it was about survival. The galaxy had underestimated humanity once, and now it seemed that those ancient warriors were ready to remind everyone of what had been forgotten. Back in the human stronghold, the leader of the warriors stood at the center of the room, speaking with a quiet yet commanding presence. The galaxy has seen too much complacency, they said, their voice strong but not harsh. The great empires of the past are faltering. The Council is divided, and the inhabitants of the galaxy are losing their way. Corvin listened closely as the leader continued. We are not here to impose our will, Corvin. But we are here to ensure the galaxy does not descend into chaos. Humanity was once a force that shaped civilizations. We are ready to take that role again, but this time, we will do it with the wisdom of the ages. Corvin nodded slowly, his mind racing. He had always believed that the galaxy's future lay in the hands of the Council. But now, faced with these legendary beings, he wondered if that belief had been misguided. Humanity had been absent, yes, but it had been shaping itself in ways no one had anticipated. They were not the same species they had once been. We need allies, the human leader said, breaking Corvin from his thoughts. But we also need people who understand the true meaning of strength. Power is not something to be wielded recklessly. It must be tempered with wisdom. Corvin felt a spark of something within him, something that wasn't quite hope, but closer to it. He had witnessed countless battles, watched as civilizations rose and fell, and now here stood the proof that humanity could reshape the galaxy in a way no one had imagined. These warriors were not conquerors, they were protectors, looking to restore balance to a galaxy teetering on the edge of chaos. Will you stand with us? The leader asked, their gaze piercing, but filled with something Corvin hadn't expected, respect. Corvin was silent for a long moment, weighing the words. There was so much at stake, alliances, power, and the very future of the galaxy itself. But he could feel the pull of something deeper, something he hadn't anticipated. I will, Corvin said finally, his voice steady. But only if we can do this the right way. Not through domination, but through cooperation. If we're going to change this galaxy, we must do it together. The human leader's expression softened. Agreed. We will build something better, something lasting. But first, We must begin with the hardest step, confronting the chaos that threatens to consume us all. As the decision was made, a strange sense of unity began to settle over Corvin. He knew the risks, but something about the warrior's vision stirred a part of him he hadn't felt in years: purpose. The galaxy was on the brink, and humanity was the catalyst that would either push it toward destruction or help it rise from the ashes. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, the ripple effects of humanity's return were being felt. News spread like wildfire, though the details were murky, and many still questioned the true intentions of the human warriors. Some saw them as saviors, others as harbingers of a new age of conflict. But as each day passed, more and more began to recognize the significance of what was happening. The balance was shifting. Corvin turned to the warriors, watching as they prepared. There was a quiet resolve in their eyes, something that resonated deeply within him. These were not just soldiers, they were leaders, teachers, and healers. They had come to restore the galaxy, but to do so, they would have to confront a threat unlike any the galaxy had faced before. Corvin knew the decision was the right one. But now, the hardest part was ahead. The true test would come when the galaxy's greatest powers were forced to confront the return of humanity and the changes they would bring. The following day, the Galactic Council convened. Corvin stood before the assembly, the weight of history heavy on his shoulders. This was not just another political negotiation. This was the moment the galaxy would decide its fate. Humanity has returned, Corvin said, his voice strong, not as conquerors, but as guardians. And they are ready to take their place in the galaxy once more. The question now is whether we stand with them, or against them. The chamber fell silent. Corvin stood at the heart of the Galactic Council chamber, the weight of his decision hanging heavily in the air. The representatives from every corner of the galaxy watched him intently. The council had always been a place of tense diplomacy, but today, it felt different. Today, the fate of the galaxy was at stake. Humanity had returned, its warriors, its leaders, its people, and now they would either be embraced or rejected. Corvin had already chosen his side. But the council, they were still divided. "I trust you understand the gravity of the situation," one of the elder council members, Commander Valaris, said with a sharp, calculating tone. His eyes were narrowed as they fixed on Corvin. Humanity's return is not without risks. They've been gone for centuries. We don't know what they've become, what they've learned, or whether they can truly be trusted. The galaxy has moved on, and we've managed just fine without them. Corvin's fingers tightened around the podium, but he held his ground. The galaxy is at a crossroads. We may have been managing, but we've been doing so at the expense of unity, peace, and order. We've watched as our alliances weakened and our enemies grew bolder. Humanity's warriors offer us something different: wisdom, strength, and purpose. Purpose? Valaris scoffed. They're here for one thing, Corvin, to reclaim what they lost. Their return is nothing more than a power grab, disguised as benevolence. Corvin looked across the chamber at the other council members. Some were visibly uncomfortable with the growing tensions, while others sat in silence, contemplating the implications. The galaxy had always been ruled by delicate alliances and careful negotiations, but the humans, these warriors, had shattered that illusion. They hadn't come to negotiate, they had come to change the course of history. We've seen enough empires rise and fall, Corvin continued, his voice unwavering. You can call it a power grab if you wish, but these humans are not conquerors. They seek something more. They seek balance, balance that we have lost over the centuries. Commander Valaris' expression darkened. Balance? Or is it control you seek to hand them, Corvin? The room seemed to hold its breath as Corvin stepped forward, feeling the weight of his responsibility. He had never been a fan of political maneuvering, of dance words and half-truths. But here, in the presence of the galaxy's greatest powers, his words had to count. Perhaps you're right, Corvin said, his voice softening just enough to carry the weight of sincerity. Perhaps I am offering humanity a role of power. But not in the way you think. If we choose to fight them, we will lose. If we ignore them, we risk letting the galaxy fracture further, beyond repair. They offer us something we desperately need, unity. And if we refuse that offer, we'll be signing our own death sentence. Valaris stood tall, his face a mask of defiance. Then the decision is made. We will not bow to these ancient humans. Let them play their games elsewhere. We will defend our galaxy as we always have. As the words left Valaris' lips, the room erupted into heated arguments. Council members shouted over one another, fear and uncertainty clouding their thoughts. The notion of accepting humanity's return, especially as a dominant force, was too much for some to swallow. But in the midst of the chaos, a calm voice rose from the back of the room. "We will not stand divided," said High Ambassador Tlara, her voice steady, her demeanor one of quiet authority. "The return of humanity does not mean the end of our power, but the beginning of a new chapter. They offer us strength, not as adversaries, but as allies." Corvin's heart lifted at the words, and he saw others in the room nodding in agreement, albeit reluctantly. The mention of alliance seemed to soften the tensions, but it did little to resolve the immediate fears. If they were to join forces with humanity, the Council would need to reconcile their differences, and that would take more than a few kind words. It would require action and sacrifice. "We will take a vote," Valaris said, his voice growing colder. "If you truly believe humanity's return is our salvation, let it be decided by the vote of this council." Corvin's stomach tightened. A vote meant that the decision would be split. The risk of further fracturing the galaxy was too great. There was no turning back now. "We stand with humanity," Corvin declared, his voice clear and unyielding. "And if that means going against the will of the council, so be it." The chamber fell silent once again. Those who had supported Corvin's decision shifted uneasily in their seats, but there was no denying the force behind his words. The galaxy, fractured and divided, was staring at the precipice. What lay beyond that edge was unknown. Elsewhere, in the heart of the human stronghold, the warriors prepared for what was to come. They had seen the signs of dissent, the hesitation of those in power. But they had also witnessed something far more powerful, unity among the few who had dared to stand with them. "Corvin has chosen his side," the human leader said to his closest advisors. "Now we prepare. It's time to show the galaxy that we've come not to conquer, but to restore what has been lost." The leader's words were filled with quiet confidence. There was no doubt that their return would shake the foundations of the galaxy. But it was not power they sought, at least not in the conventional sense. What they wanted was far more profound: a galaxy united, a galaxy restored. The vote was held, and the results were as expected. The council was split, half agreeing to ally with humanity, the other half determined to stand firm against them. The galaxy was now on the edge of an unprecedented shift, and every faction would have to decide where their loyalty lay. As the vote concluded, Corvin left the chamber, his thoughts heavy. The fight was far from over. It had only just begun. Back in the heart of the human stronghold, the warriors prepared themselves for what came next. They had offered peace, but if peace could not be had, they would show the galaxy what true strength looked like. Corvin knew this was only the beginning. But as he walked away from the council, one thought lingered in his mind: humanity had returned, and nothing would ever be the same. The days following the council's vote were tense, as Corvin had feared. The galaxy's political landscape had shifted irrevocably, and every faction, from the distant mining colonies to the towering arcologies of the Galactic core, braced themselves for the unknown. Corvin had hoped for a swift resolution, a harmonious new beginning forged between humanity and the galaxy's varied species. But the reality was far more complex. The fracture lines had deepened, and those who had opposed humanity's return were not ready to back down. Instead, they began to make moves of their own. The first signs of rebellion appeared almost immediately. Rebel factions, once hidden in the shadows of the galaxy's less explored corners, now began to rally, under the banner of unity, against what they saw as a reckless decision by the Council. They called themselves the Galactic Sovereigns, and they believed that the galaxy's future should remain in the hands of those who had built it, not some unknown race that had vanished for centuries. Their actions were swift, and their reach was broad. They hit the communications lines between the largest planets, spreading propaganda about humanity's intentions and igniting fear in the hearts of those who had voted in favor of an alliance. Corvin knew the situation was deteriorating fast. The galaxy wasn't just divided anymore, it was now fractured. And the fear of humanity's re-emergence was quickly turning into outright hostility. Yet, in the heart of the human stronghold, Corvin's resolve remained unbroken. "I knew it wouldn't be easy," Corvin muttered to his closest advisors as they gathered in the war room, the air heavy with tension. "Admiral Corvin, there are reports of sabotage on 3 of the outer stations," one of his officers spoke, a young woman whose face was drawn with worry. "They've taken out communications relays, and there's word of pirate raids picking up on the fringe worlds. They're starting to make their moves." Corvin's eyes narrowed. The timing of these attacks was not coincidental. The rebels were mobilizing faster than anyone had anticipated. "They are testing us," he said. "But we must not react with fear. We've waited for this moment for centuries. And we will not be shaken by threats and sabotage." His words rang true in the hearts of those in the room, but he couldn't shake the growing unease in the pit of his stomach. The stakes were higher than ever, and every decision could mean the difference between peace and all-out war. Outside the stronghold, the darkened skies above the human fleet reflected the turbulence brewing within. A quiet hum filled the air, the calm before the storm. The warriors who had once stood as symbols of humanity's lost greatness were now standing on the edge of a precipice, unsure of whether they would be able to maintain their moral high ground or fall to the temptations of their newfound power. In the midst of all this uncertainty, a message arrived. It was from Clara, the High Ambassador who had so passionately spoken out in favor of humanity's return. She had sent a personal request for a meeting with Corvin. He wasted no time. "Prepare the ship. We leave within the hour." The meeting with Clara was held in the quiet confines of a secluded outpost, away from the prying eyes of the rebel forces. Corvin and his officers arrived to find Clara waiting, her silver hair gleaming softly under the dim lights of the outpost's command center. Her expression was calm, but there was a hardness to her eyes that Corvin had never seen before. "Corvin," Clara greeted him with a nod, her voice calm but filled with a weight that made the room feel heavy. "You were right. The galaxy is not ready for this change. But there is something you must understand. We are not fighting for control of the galaxy. We are fighting for its future." Corvin felt a surge of hope, but it was quickly tempered by the severity in Clara's tone. "What do you mean?" Clara took a deep breath before continuing. "We are not just fighting the Galactic Sovereigns. We are fighting against a centuries-old system of power that cannot, and will not, be so easily undone. The empire that exists now is built on corruption, on old alliances that no longer serve the greater good. They will not surrender power willingly, even to save the galaxy from its own destruction. But I believe we can change that. Together, humanity and the galaxy can stand united. But the path will be long. We must show them what true leadership looks like." Corvin nodded, the weight of her words sinking deep into his thoughts. "And how do we do that?" Clara's eyes locked onto his, and for a moment, there was a deep understanding between them. "We must show them who we are, what we can do, and what we've already done. The warriors of humanity have been lost for centuries, but their legacy is not something that will be easily forgotten. We will fight for peace, not through domination, but through inspiration. We must demonstrate our strength, not just as warriors, but as a people capable of leading the galaxy into a new era. Corvin stood silent for a long moment, contemplating Tlara's words. His heart was torn between the old way of thinking, of fighting for dominance, and the new path she was suggesting, one of unity, of strength through cooperation. The decision was still up to him. He was the one who had pushed for humanity's return. He was the one who had promised that their strength would not be used to conquer, but to uplift. And now, as he faced the growing storm of opposition, he had to find a way to lead them through it without resorting to the same mistakes of the past. Then let's show them, Corvin said finally. Let's show them the truth about humanity, about what we stand for. And we will fight with everything we have to bring the galaxy together. As Corvin and Tlara departed the outpost, the full weight of their mission settled on his shoulders. The storm that was coming wouldn't just be fought with weapons and strategies. It would be fought with words, with actions, with the power of their ideals. In the coming days, as the first battle lines were drawn, Corvin would learn what true leadership meant, and how far humanity was willing to go to see their vision of peace realized. But even in the midst of the coming chaos, one thing was clear: humanity had come back to the galaxy not to claim dominion, but to claim the future. And whether or not they would succeed, only time would tell. The galaxy was a powder keg, its tensions on the verge of igniting. Corvin knew it was no longer a matter of winning a war, it was about saving the galaxy from its own darkness. The rebellion was growing stronger by the day, but there was one thing that Corvin had overlooked: the power of unity and hope. In the days after his meeting with Tlara, Corvin had rallied his forces, preparing for the inevitable conflict. But he had done something else as well. He had reached out to the galaxy's most distant colonies, seeking to understand the lives of those who lived in the shadows of the great empires. These were the forgotten people, the ones who had never been part of the great intergalactic politics, yet they held the key to the galaxy's future. Corvin knew that to bring about real change, they couldn't just fight the rebellion with guns and fleets. They needed to unite the people, show them that humanity's return wasn't about domination, but about leadership that could bring everyone together. The galaxy had been fractured for far too long. Different species, different planets, and even different ideologies had led to deep divides, creating vast distances between people who had the same hopes, dreams, and desires. Humanity's legacy had always been about overcoming adversity, about the strength to endure in the face of overwhelming odds. And that strength was what the galaxy needed now. On the day of the critical assembly, Corvin stood at the head of a massive council chamber, flanked by Tlara and his closest officers. The galaxy's greatest leaders had gathered, including those who had once been fierce opponents of humanity's return. The atmosphere was tense, but Corvin stood firm, his resolve unshaken. Today, we stand at the crossroads of history, Corvin began, his voice carrying across the chamber. For centuries, humanity has been lost to the stars. But today, we are here to show you who we are, not as conquerors, not as invaders, but as people who believe in the future, a future where all beings, regardless of species or origin, can live in peace. We come to you not as a threat, but as partners, ready to rebuild a galaxy broken by fear and distrust. His words echoed through the chamber, and for a moment, silence reigned. But then, slowly, one by one, the leaders began to rise. The first was Tlara, her hand raised in a silent signal for support. Corvin had been right, the galaxy's greatest strength wasn't in its armies, but in its people, in the hearts and minds of those who dared to believe that there could be more than war and division. It was a long, tense moment before anyone spoke. The first leader to break the silence was an elder from one of the oldest and most respected races in the galaxy. His eyes, though aged and filled with the weight of countless years, were full of understanding. He had lived through the galaxy's countless wars, witnessed the rise and fall of empires, and understood better than anyone the cost of fear and distrust. Corvin, he said, his voice gravelly but filled with wisdom, you speak of peace, and you speak of unity. But what makes you think that a people who have been absent for so long can change a galaxy so entrenched in its ways? Corvin met his gaze unwaveringly. We do not claim to have all the answers. But we have something that this galaxy has forgotten: hope. We have the strength to overcome, not by force, but by the power of our shared vision. We believe that the galaxy's future is not in the hands of the few, but in the hands of all who call it home. The elder nodded slowly, as if weighing the truth in Corvin's words. Then, in a movement that surprised the room, he turned to the rest of the council. I stand with Corvin. Humanity has shown us that it is not too late for us to change. And perhaps, just perhaps, their return is what we need to awaken our own potential. The room erupted into murmurs, but the first crack in the resistance had been made. One by one, the other leaders joined in, some reluctantly, others with quiet enthusiasm. They were willing to give humanity a chance, not because they believed they were perfect, but because they saw the courage in their actions, the willingness to fight not for dominion, but for a better future for everyone. The debate raged on for hours, but by the end of the day, the galaxy had changed. A new coalition had been formed, a fragile alliance of species and nations committed to rebuilding the galaxy together. The rebels, though still a threat, had been forced to the fringes. The real battle had been won, not in the field of war, but in the hearts of those who had believed in humanity's vision. Corvin stood in the center of the room, the weight of what had just transpired settling on his shoulders. He had done it. They had done it. The galaxy was no longer divided by fear and distrust, it was now united by a shared hope for a better future. Clara stepped up beside him, her smile soft but filled with pride. You were right all along, Corvin. The galaxy didn't need to be saved by force. It needed to be reminded of its own strength, of the potential that lies within us all.